Hey guys, Philarus here. So my Bear Titan starter is now level 95 and clearing through T15s and Uber Pinnacles very quickly and comfortably. So I thought it'd be a pretty good time to share what I've been up to and what I have going on in the build, because I think I've baked in quite a few interesting interactions that help maximize the output on a pretty reasonable budget. I'm still in fairly bad starter gear. I have, I think, 4 to 5 divs invested in the character in total thus far. But as you can see, I can kill Uberzesht in just 4 to 5 seconds, and mapping you just kind of run through and one-shot everything as you go. So it's very effective relative to the budget. Now, it's not that different from other bear builds at a baseline in that you're kind of just walking around with Walking Calamity. We weren't given that many shapeshift skills to begin with, so, everybody ended up on Walking Calamity plus some form of movement, whether that's pouncing around, just running around, or using Rampage. And I show an example of all three here because it's kind of preferential. You don't have to change the setup at all. You just move how you prefer by swapping out like one set of skill gems. Relative to other bear builds that I've seen, I do think that my setup is a little bit more effective. I'm taking advantage of several interactions that I haven't seen anybody else really using yet. So even if you don't plan to follow this build one-to-one, I think as long as you play a bear setup, this video will be worth a watch because there's likely to be a couple things that you can take away and transplant into your own setup to get a little bit more output. So the first thing I want to go over is the clearing setup. I am making use of a Herald of Ice armor explosion chaining setup. It works the exact same way that it did in patch 0.3. It was left unchanged. So it's just very, very helpful in kind of solidifying your clear coverage with Walking Calamity and making sure that you have really, really clean, clear pack explosions. And that way you're not missing any mobs with Walking Calamity as you're running by. For those who don't know, it's a pretty simple setup. You have Herald of Ice, you get some gain as physical damage from a perfect essence of abrasion on your weapon, and then that allows Herald of Ice to deal physical damage. And you slot in Armor Explosion, Armor Break, Uruk Smelting. Herald of Ice will fully break armor, proc Armor Explosion, and then Armor Explosion will chill and shatter because of Pulsar Keln, triggering Herald of Ice again, and you get this kind of infinite loop to make sure the entire pack is killed cleanly. Pulsar Keln is only mandatory when you're on a starter budget. Once you have some better gear and more damage, you'll be able to freeze pretty reliably without having to rely on Pulsar Keln for shatters, so you can drop that off for a rare ring later. Now, where are we getting the cold damage to actually set up the Herald of Ice explosions as a bear? We don't actually have any cold flat damage anywhere on our gear. It is all coming from the new lineage support Bhatair's Vengeance. A lot of shapeshift setups are using Bhatair's Vengeance because we stack up a lot of rage, so as soon as you freeze a target, you get a huge amount of gain as cold damage. Now, the most common setup right now on bear shamans is to put it onto your maul and then support it with Embitter and Freeze. And that way, all of your gain as extra damage is converted to cold. You're able to do some cold damage with Maul, and hopefully after a few whacks, it'll freeze and proc Bhatair's Vengeance. I don't really enjoy that setup, not only because it's a little bit less reliable to actually freeze outright as compared to using the Lunar Assault from the Werewolf form, which has an obscene up to 600% more freeze buildup, but also because you're kind of killing most of the slots on your Maul, and I'm using Maul for single target. There are other single target setups you can use, such as Fury of the Mountain, but I really, really hated playing Fury of the Mountain. There were just so many particles on my screen, I couldn't see anything. It was just fiery explosions everywhere. When I was bossing, I literally had to hold my minimap open to try to see where the boss was from the icon because I could not find it on my screen. So I ended up going with a Maul setup for single target, Maul plus Walking Calamity, of course. So I didn't want to use Bhatair's on my Maul. So I am sticking it on Lunar Assault. It has so much freeze buildup that, you just walk up to a white mob or a blue mob, you use one Lunar Assault, it'll freeze, you get Bhatair's Vengeance up, and you swap back to your bear form. Now, to go over the single target setup, as you saw, I was able to kill T3 Zesht in just 4 to 5 seconds. You heavy stun him, you whack him, and he just falls over. So where's the damage coming from? I don't actually have particularly good gear. I'm wearing a Pulsar Keln. My other ring has one kind of crappy lightning roll. I have no flat damage on my gloves. And my talisman is decent. I crafted it for about 1 divine, but it's not great. I just took a tier 3 fizz percent, hit it with a greater essence of abrasion, perfect essence of abrasion for the gain as fizz. This is just purely for the Herald of Ice chaining. Perfect essence of battle, and Amanamu Desecrate for the attack speed. Now, I do think it costs a little bit more to craft these talismans now because other content creators have made some videos on how to craft, so I think some of the crafting component prices have gone up. But not too expensive of a talisman. You don't have to start with a very expensive base. And I don't have any of the expensive lineage supports like Garukons or Rakiatas. I am still non-crit as well, and I am actually bossing on my clearing setup, where with all of my movement speed, all of my AoE, I have not bothered to set up an actual bossing setup yet. So once you get some actual gear together, get some lineage supports, and get an actual bossing tree, I'm pretty sure you just kind of nuke T3 Zesh down in like 1 to 2 seconds very, very comfortably. So where is the single target damage actually coming from? There's a few different interactions going on here. The first is that I'm supporting Maul with the new support gem, Volcanic Eruption, which reads, supported strikes trigger Volcanic Eruption on hitting ignited enemies. We are always igniting enemies pretty much right away because of Walking Calamity, which not only deals a lot of fire damage, but gives fire damage to our other skills. So what does Volcanic Eruption actually do? It fires 4 little molten blasts, essentially, that shotgun on top of the boss. If it's a very big boss, all 4 will hit. If it's a smaller humanoid boss, maybe 2 to 3 projectiles will hit. So what's the big deal here? Because it looks pretty unimpressive. Attack damage of the skill is 20% of default attack damage. If all 4 hit, that's 80%. That does not seem like a lot when our Maul is doing 400% at a baseline at gem level 25. The important distinction here is that this is not attack damage, this is default attack damage. Your default attack on any shapeshift form is tied to, if I'm not mistaken, the Unarmed Punch, which has 312% attack damage at level 90. So we are not taking 20%, we are taking 20% of 312. So when all 4 of these hit and we have 80%, we are getting a 250% attack damage buffer. So this is not 400 plus 80, this is 400 plus 250. Now, I could make a whole other video just talking about Volcanic Eruption. I think the support is completely broken. The thing that's supposed to keep it in check is that there's a cooldown time of 0.4 seconds. Now, we don't really care about that on this build because if you look at my Maul, my attack time is 0.43 seconds. I don't go under the cooldown, so every single Maul will proc Volcanic Eruption. However, this cooldown, internal cooldown of 0.4 seconds is reduced by cooldown reduction. I have a little bit of cooldown reduction coming from a multitasking anoint as well as the node authority. So actually, even if I went a little bit under 0.4 seconds attack time on my Maul, I wouldn't have to worry. I would still be proccing Volcanic Eruptions on every hit. Now, it's actually Werewolf, I think, that really breaks Volcanic Eruption with some setups. Because Werewolf can attack so quickly, and because this cooldown is actually affected by CDR, if you stack some CDR on your tree or you run something like a Temporalis, you can get the cooldown time, I think, to the minimum of 0.1 seconds, which means like every single hit while hitting with something very, very fast like Werewolf Shred will be proccing Volcanic Eruption. And when you look at Werewolf Shred, it has a very, very pathetic base attack damage. I think it's something like 120 to 130% at gem level 20. So when you're adding on a 250% buffer onto that, that's like doubling, if not even tripling your, sorry, my cat's on my keyboard. That's doubling, if not even tripling your damage in some circumstances. There are some hoops you have to jump through to enable it, of course, but I think the support has a ton of potential and hopefully more people play around with it soon and we see some really broken setups with it. The other interesting thing we are doing for our single target is we are making use of Predator's Mark. Now, Pounce applies Predator's Mark automatically when you pounce onto a boss, and bosses will take 4% increased damage for each enemy within 6 meters of it, up to 60% at a 20 quality pounce. Now, most people choose to replace Predator's Mark with a socketed Freezing Mark, Sniper's Mark, something like that, because Predator's Mark at a glance is just not that great. Even though that's a lot of increased damage taken by the boss, you can't really make use of this unless you actually have minions and wolves around you. And the problem with that is the wolves are kind of useless. They don't really do a lot of damage and they die really, really fast. So what we're doing to overcome this is we are supporting Pounce with Brutus Brain, where our wolves can no longer deal damage, which they didn't really do anyways, but now they can't take damage either. So we are permanently running around with, I think this is 7 wolves. In addition to ourselves, that's 8 targets, 8 enemies, which is 32% more increased damage taken by the boss when Predator's mark is on it. That's a 32% damage multiplier that we have permanently as soon as we pounce onto a boss. I think Brutus Brain only costs around 1 Divine right now. This setup is super strong, and I think this should be taken advantage of by more setups as well. We are also supporting Walking Calamity with Ambrosia 2. Ambrosia was nerfed pretty significantly coming into patch 0.4. It used to give a lot more lightning damage. This is pretty optional, but we are lacking lightning damage on the rest of our setup, so this gives us a way to shock. The way this works is because you only cast Walking Calamity once every like 30 seconds, we don't really care about the big penalty to our Mana Flask because, you just use it once. Our Mana Flask has 125 charges right now, so whenever we pop Walking Calamity, it gains, I think, somewhere in the range of 43% extra damage as lightning. This is not that much more powerful than a standard support like, say, Deliberation, which would give 20% more damage. But again, I don't really have lightning damage elsewhere on my setup, so this gives us access to very consistent, reliable shocks. Beyond this, we are using a +4 Flyer Flower. I think this cost me around 30 Chaos. This is because the Walking Calamity doesn't have a melee, spell, or projectile tag, so the only way to scale its gem levels with your amulet is with a Fire Flower. Fire Flower is just a kind of cheap option. I don't think this is the best endgame option. Eventually, I will switch to an amulet that has something like life, percent max life, spirit, crit chance, crit damage, something like that. Because this +4 fire skills only really affects Walking Calamity. It doesn't really help out my Maul, doesn't help out my Furious Slam. It's just a cheap way to get damage on a league start. You could, if you really want to all in on Walking Calamity, opt to try to go for a +6 Corrupted Fire Flower, but those are very expensive to make right now. So I think a +4 is fine, and then you can transition to a rare amulet when you move to crit. I am wearing a Constricting Command, just like in patch 0.3. We are a melee build, so whenever we're bossing, -4 is enough to be considered surrounded still, and take advantage of the strong surrounded nodes. That being said, I will probably drop Constricting at some point. It was very strong in the mid-game when I didn't have as much damage and I was kind of meleeing a bit more. But at this point, Walking Calamity is kind of just killing stuff at the edges of my screen as I'm running through the map, so I don't actually have Constricting up as much as I used to. So I think at some point I'm probably just going to drop this for a rare helmet. I am also taking Crushing Impacts for a little bit more damage. My hits are Crushing Blows, so I heavy stun bosses more quickly, and I deal 25% more damage against heavily stunned enemies. I think at some point I may drop this off if I pick up a Sign Aquo, because Sign Aquo kind of overlaps with Crushing Blows. Crushing Blows will cause you to heavy stun a boss at 70% buildup, but Sign Aquo causes you to heavy stun the boss at 50% buildup, right? So it kind of invalidates this, and the 20% more damage on Sign Aquo replaces the 25% more damage here. So at that point, if I do elect to go for Sign Aquo, I may drop this off for Stone Skin to get a little bit more armor from my body armor. At the moment, my body armor kind of sucks. It's just something I picked up off the ground. If I get something with like 2.5k plus armor, at that point, then I'll be more incentivized to pick up Stone Skin. The last important part of the setup is the Rage and Glory generation. I am using a Warcry technique that I saw, I think, from one of Dreamcore's videos, where you just spam your Warcry and you get up to max Rage and max Glory within just a couple seconds. You only really have to do this at the start of the map because you're starting at 0 Rage. And then once your Walking Calamity falls off, you're still at maximum Rage, so you just Warcry like once or twice and you get Walking Calamity back up. And the way this works is we have an offhand tree with a bunch of Warcry speed, as well as Roaring Cries, so that War Cries have a minimum of 10 power. And when you combine this with Raging Cry, which gives you rage per power on enemies in range on your Ferocious Roar, as well as Enraged Cry, you can bypass your War Cry cooldown because of Enraged Cry by spending rage, but we generate more rage than we actually spend, so we end up maxing out our Rage and Glory very quickly. Additionally, in our offhand, we are using an Amor Mandragora, which gives us 1 Druidic Prowess for every total Rage spent, which gives 10% skill speed up to 3 stacks for 10 seconds. So every time we Rage, or every time we bypass cooldown with our Warcry, we spend 20 Rage, and we get this little stack of Druidic Prowess. I think eventually I will drop this off because I would like to eventually swap to an actual bossing setup that has some crit. So I think at that point, I'll probably add Roaring Cries to my mapping setup alongside the AoE and movement speed. Maybe like 1 Warcry speed cluster, and then my other weapon setup will be like a probably the same talisman, hopefully with some crit on it, and then some crit on the tree. Your rotation upon entering a map is pretty easy. You just spam Warcry a few times, get your Walking Calamity up, pop it, go find something to hit with a Lunar Assault, right? We get our Bhathairs up, and now we can kind of just run around as a bear, and everything explodes around us. At this point, you can use whatever mode of movement that you prefer. You can kind of just run around as a bear. You can use Pounce and like weave that in whenever it's off cooldown to move a little bit faster, or you can use Rampage. I prefer to use Pounce, but it is a little bit more micromanagey than the other methods, because when you're in wolf form, your Walking Calamity is not going to be coming down around you. So what you have to do is, after you pounce, as soon as you land, hit your maul, and then spacebar to cancel your maul with a dash. So it'll look like this. And this way, we go right back into bear form with no delay, and we can kind of we can kind of weave in pounces without actually impacting our Walking Calamity very much. When you run out, just Warcry a few times, get it back up, right? Make sure that you're keeping up your Bhatir's Vengeance, so every now and then, hit something with a Lunar Assault, and you can do the same tech where you Lunar Assault, and then Maul and Spacebar, and you go right back into the bear form with no delay. I'll show this again, right? So Lunar Assault, right-click, Spacebar, and you're back into the bear form right away. So once you get used to it, it's pretty fluid, and it doesn't really interrupt your Walking Calamity. Now, the reason I prefer it over Rampage technically is the fastest movement right now, especially because it's bugged. If you cast a Rampage out of your wolf form, you retain the 30% move speed from your wolf form, so you just Rampage around super, super fast. But I do find Rampage to be a little bit inconsistent. It feels really, really good in wide open layouts like Sandspit, but if you're in like an indoors layout with lots of terrain, lots of obstacles, then Rampage feels really awkward. Additionally, you can't really loot items when you're rampaging, because if you stop to pick up an item, you have to cast your Rampage again, and it has a really, really long cast time. So even though it has kind of the highest ceiling on movement speed right now, I do kind of just prefer running around and occasionally weaving in pounces myself. Now, I'll very quickly mouse over my gear and skill setup so you can see it, but I will include a POB so you can just check from there as well. So, again, Talisman I went over, Constricting Command, Fire Flower, Pulsar Kelm, whatever rare ring you can get. These are pretty easy to craft. I crafted mine. I just bought one that had, I think, flat damage plus a resistance suffix. I hit it with a Greater Essence of Ruin for chaos resistance. I used an Ulamon Desecrate for hybrid, lightning, and chaos resistance, and then I just hit it with 2 Greater Exalted Orbs, and it came out like this. So it pretty much solved all of my chaos resistance all at once. Chest, just get something with a ton of armor. Mine is kind of crappy. I think probably a good stopgap option is Warrior Invictus. Warrior Invictus got buffed pretty hard, so you can get one that gives you a bunch of resist, spirit, life, pretty good armor and evasion, a little bit of energy shield. I think that's a pretty good option mid-game. Really crappy rare gloves. You can just use better rare gloves or a signed Aquo. Eventually, the belt should be replaced by a Headhunter, of course. Just some movement speed boots, get some move speed, life, resists, armor applies to elemental damage. Eventually, I would like to pick up an Olroth's Flask, but for now, I cannot afford that. You can pick up a Fall of the Axe Silver Charm for Onslaught, but eventually you can get Onslaught on your weapon with a little bit more of an expensive craft. Plus, you get Onslaught when you proc Savage Fury anyways, so I didn't really bother investing in that. And then Mana Flask doesn't matter. You just use it like every now and then when you use up your mana doing Ferocious Roar into Walking Calamity. Just make sure you buy one that has at least 67% increased charges. They cost like 1 Exalt. And this is so that your Ambrosia gives you the maximum lightning damage possible. For skill setup, we are using Maul, supported by Rage 3, Rapid Attacks 2, Volcanic Eruption, Concentrated Area, Close Combat 2. This is on, well, it's naturally the second weapon set, because my actual weapon set is weapon set 2, and then my weapon set 1 right now is just for Warcries. Pounce, cooldown recovery 2. This is only if you actually move around with Pounce. If you're using Rampage, you don't need this. Mark for Death, Holy Descent for some consecrated ground, Mark of Siphoning, so we have Leech to life and mana when we're bossing, and Brutus Brain so our wolves don't die. Next, we have Lunar Assault, weapon set 2, with Bhatir's Vengeance, Freeze, I don't think you even need Freeze, Prolonged Duration, this extends your Bhatir's Vengeance buff, Rapid Attacks 2, Close Combat 2, Walking Calamity, supported by Elemental Armament 2, Rigwald's Ferocity, this is in weapon set 2 by the way, so this gets the 30% more damage perk. The reduced attack speed doesn't matter because attack speed does not affect Walking Calamity's meteors. The meteors are set every 0.05 seconds. Attack speed only makes you cast Walking Calamity a little bit faster, so it's not very, meaningful. Prolonged duration, concentrated area, so it falls a little bit closer to you. I'm not actually 100% sure if concentrated area is that good, or if you should replace this with something else. I feel like it does make the skill a little bit more consistent, and I don't care too much about the size of the meteors because as long as any meteor hits during clearing, Herald of Ice is just going to blow up the screen anyways. And for bossing, this is pretty nice damage and it keeps the radius a little bit smaller. So I think Concentrated Area is good, and Ambrosia 2. Furious Slam, weapon set 2. Close Combat 2, Rapid Attacks 2, Stun 2. This is just so I build up the heavy stun faster. If you're playing like a non-heavy stun setup, like a Shaman, for example, you can just replace this with the thing that gives more like 35% chance of another Aftershock. Fist of War 2 and Ambrosia. Ambrosia is pretty optional. This is, again, just for a little bit more consistency in shocking the boss as quickly as possible. Ferocious Roar, this is on weapon set 1 with all of our Warcry speed and Warcry perks. This is supported by Tireless, Raging Cry, Enraged Warcry, and Efficiency. Enraged Warcry, you can use either Enraged Warcry 1 or 2. 1 costs 20 rage, 2 costs 15 rage. It kind of depends on your preference. Costing 15 rage means you get your rage and glory up a little bit faster and don't have to spend as much mana. 20 rage means that you are proccing a more Mandragora every single time that you are bypassing your cooldown with a Warcry, so you can make sure you're stacking your Druidic prowess to max every single time. So that's kind of up to you. If I had another slot, I think there's a Warcry support that gives, let me see here. Oh, I don't think I actually have any support gems. I think there's one like Exposing Cry. It gives exposure because I don't really have any pen or anything like that built into the build yet because I was planning to get Rockiatas eventually. So you could pick up something like Exposing Cry, but it might blow up the mana cost a little bit. So I don't know if that's worth it. Then we have Scavenged Plating. We are always armor breaking during clear. This is off of our Herald of Ice explosions. And during bossing, this is off of Mark for Death, as well as our Ferocious Roar. So we always have Scavenged Plating up for some extra armor. Herald of Ice, supported by... Herald of Ice should be in weapon set 2. This is supported by Armor Explosion, Armor Break 3, Uruk Smelting, Magnified Area 2, and Longshot. Longshot is not that great. You can put something else here like Elemental Armament, Freeze, whatever instead. This is because I needed 10 green gems to get the 5% move speed from Gem Enthusiast. So Longshot's just okay. It's not actually the best in slot option here. I may reconfigure my gems a little bit at some point. And then lastly, Overwhelming Presence. It's not that important. It just gives a little bit of Elemental Ailment threshold and Stun threshold to chill/freeze and stun more easily. I am supporting this with Cannibalism, so I have some life sustain while clearing. And lastly, I have Savage Fury. This is also on weapon set 1, like the Warcries, because currently Savage Fury is still bugged. It wasn't fixed. You can have it on weapon set 1, and it'll still build up the Fury stacks while you're in your weapon set 2, and then you can pop it to get Onslaught and some damage while you're bossing or doing an Abyss, something like that. I'm sure this will get fixed eventually, and at that point, I'll kind of reevaluate and see if it's still worth keeping Savage Fury in the build and dropping maybe Overwhelming Presence. Well, actually, I guess at that point, you could just have like a Spirit Amulet, right? Life, Spirit, maybe +3 melee, crit, so you could still use Savage Fury. But yeah, for now, this is on weapon set 1. And then lastly, if you do want to use Rampage, because it does have the fastest movement speed cap, it is Rampage, Efficiency, Burgeon, Stomping Grounds, Momentum, and Aftershock 2. For my passive tree, I'm starting at the Warrior. Eventually, I'm probably just going to take this attribute line, but for now, there's some stun build-up perks here. There's some area damage, break increased armor perks here. So I'm going through this line at the moment. I will respec out eventually just to save some points. The reason I like this line is I can build up stun a little bit faster on the bosses since my damage isn't that high yet. And having a little bit of break increased armor from Reverberating Impact as well as Crushing Judgment just makes the armor break on Herald of Ice more consistent. Because again, I don't have that much damage yet, so my Herald of Ice isn't doing that much damage yet. So, it just helps a little bit to have these for now. Eventually you can drop them off. So I'm picking up on weapon set 1, which is my Warcry set. Roaring Cries, and basically just all of the Warcry speed and Warcry perks that I could pick up. On my other weapon set / main tree, I am heading up here for some skill effect duration, which keeps our Walking Calamity, our Savage Fury, and our Bhatair's Vengeance up for longer. Some area of effect, bunch of rage, damage, armor, damage, some more rage over here, the surrounded nodes, movement speed, and that's about it. There's still a lot of room for the build to grow. I may make a kind of update video after I make some improvements if I feel like it's substantial and there's enough different stuff going on. But yeah, that's it for this video. I hope you guys learned something and this helps you out on your own bear characters.